Oh.
And we are back. Welcome back, friends, to Enlightened Health and Healing with myself and Dr. Christy. I went the wrong direction. I thought I had it practiced, but I didn't.
I always get it wrong.
Yeah. So for anyone new watching, our show is to bring forward conversations about health in all areas, mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual, to bring you ideas and solutions to whatever things you have going on in life, to give you ideas to work through them, perhaps easier, perhaps just to at least keep plateaued, or even to resolve some of the things that you have going on. So welcome back. Today we are talking about anxiety. And this is a big conversation. So we decided to break it up. And for today's show, as opposed to trying to give you the whole kitchen sink in a half hour, we are just going to try to give you some key actions to deal with anxiety in the moment. And then Christy and I also expect to integrate more anxiety-related conversations within other shows as we go through week over week. And big announcement for everybody. I'll kick it off here. Anyone who's familiar or who has watched my show in the past, I've had conversations with Jen in the past, and I'm bringing it back, newly rebranded as Tuesday Talks, specific to tips about mental and emotional wellness. So stay tuned, coming soon. Tuesday Talks with me, and having a new topic surrounded mental health once a week. So there we go. Yay. So we can continue, guys, the focus about this conversation and the focus about the importance of mental and emotional health and wellness, and keeping all the tips moving forward. Did I miss anything, Christy, before we keep going?
No, because I wasn't privy to the announcement information. Yay. So I think that's amazing. I'm so excited for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it'll be good to have the show back. So it's been a while.
Great.
Yay. All right. First, I want to welcome Dorothy. Hey, Dorothy. Always good to have you and be here. All right. So we're talking about key actions for anxiety in the moment. And guys, I think where I want to start this, and Christy, please jump in at any point, where I want to start this is there's no cookie cutter approach for dealing with anxiety. There's no one right answer for everybody. There's no one right way for everybody. And what I encourage all of you to do is look at the tips, try different things, and figure out what feels right for you and what helps you most in those moments. And I also encourage you to try it more than once, because sometimes it's a habit that you need to create. But also give yourself grace if something's not working, to know that there is a right answer out there for you to alleviate the things that you have going on. Christy, anything to add to that before we keep going?
No, I absolutely agree. Every person is specific. You have your own unique physiology, your own mental and emotional well-being, and stressors from, things that you know consciously from your past and subconsciously that you don't even remember anymore. And everyone's different. So try a couple things that we mentioned, try some things on your own, and whatever works, that's fantastic, especially if they're healthy things, of course.
Agreed. And I want to say hello to Elise. Great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.
Okay, so as I look to break out this conversation, the first thing for me that comes to mind is to know your patterns and start tracking when anxiousness or anxiety shows up for you. And start keeping note of everything you can around that scenario. Who's involved, where you're at, what triggered it. Of course, in the moment, you're not necessarily going to be able to go through all this, but after you get to more balance, take reflection on everything that encompassed it. Guys, I can tell you there are certain times of the month for me that I have more heightened anxiousness. There are certain times of the day for me on certain days that I'm more prone to anxiety than other times of the day. And oftentimes, if we can get in tune to ourselves and know, okay, this is a time of day that for me, if I do certain things, it can better manage me avoiding an anxious moment or anxiety attack. Christy, thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, 100% agreed. Absolutely. It's the first point that I had written down was just in essence is creating that awareness within yourself to know what triggers you, what sparks you when you might be more vulnerable or more susceptible to picking up other things. And the awareness is usually the first step in correcting and not even correcting so much, but just managing anything as it comes up.
Yeah, agreed. So as I look to break this conversation out, as I gave this conversation a lot of thought, one comment that I hear frequently, and I can certainly acknowledge it for myself throughout the decades, is Jen, in the exact phrase, Jen, I forget when I'm in the moment of anxiety, when I'm in the moment of an anxious, panicked thought, I forget everything I had planned. And I thought, knowing how frequently I hear that, knowing that that is certainly something I've experienced throughout time, I thought that that would be a good starter point as we lean into keeping that in mind, how to build the right strategies for yourself around that. What are your initial thoughts on that one, Christy?
I have a couple different thoughts. One of which is yes, absolutely, that's a really important topic because even I myself, who does this and helps people through this on a regular basis, sometimes find myself in those moments when we're wrapped up in our heads about something. It's not like those strategies are always front and center for us to access necessarily. So I think that's a really important topic and a good place to start. For me, one of the easiest places to start is reaching out to other people. Because sometimes if we can't see and we can't think of those initial strategies that are ordinarily helpful for us in those moments, someone else who's independent and unattached to whatever you're going through at the time can and provide some clarity and help you through it sometimes is what I find.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that yes. And I think for me, as I think about this one, and even as I dial through some of the conversations that I've been in with clients, I think it's even just getting up, just standing up and changing your state and standing up and going for a walk, or just literally just the standing up. I know there's also the philosophy behind having a reminder around your wrist to be present or to breathe. Or one of the tips that I give frequently is having a post-it on your computer so that if you get into that state, you can look at that post-it and it's an instant reminder. Because again, we get into that emotional moment. And honestly, I've had people tell me before, even just picking up the phone and calling someone, I forget. I have one of my clients who I've worked with for a while now that she literally will forget to breathe and just forget that basic of, okay, go to your box breathing or go to this. And so I guess that's where it is. What kind of anchoring reminder can you put around you, whether it be on you in the form of a bracelet or a note that is in a space that you're normally in? If you have an anxious moment, that will capture your attention to say, oh, that's right, I have to breathe. I have to breathe in this moment, or I have to get up in this moment to spark that thought in the moment.
Yeah, that was also one of the first thoughts I thought of is when you're not in an anxious moment, write down a handful of things that, at least in the past, or are suggestions to help you through that point. Then it's a matter of where are we going to put it, how are we going to be able to easily access it in that moment, and then where is there a trigger to make sure we can remember to go look at that list.
Yeah.
If it's something like you said on your wrist, then that's kind of always with you. But I mean, I can even see within myself that there would be times that I wouldn't even think to look at a list of what can pull me out of this right now. If I'm deep enough in a rabbit hole on something that's making me anxious or something that I'm in a negative place on, I wouldn't even think to look at a list to pull myself out of it.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. That's why for me, I look at, okay, what's going to be the something I'll see in and like for me, for example, for a long time on my wall, I had a no more. So if I looked off to my right, I had a no more. And that was my instant, oh, that's right. This is my reminder. This is what I have to look at. So years ago, when I was in the mix of probably my worst states of anxiety, I had Post-its all literally, if you came into my office, you would see Post-its all around my computer. And they were my reminders. I would keep my affirmations in front of me, and I would keep my reminders so that if I had a moment, it was a reminder of something enough to get me to get my ass, pardon my language, up out of my chair, because that was my tell that I had to move. If I kept sitting there, for me, I would be worse. Talking to someone for me didn't often help my anxious states. Getting up, changing my state, actually distracting myself from whatever thought I was in. So guys, there's for me, tip 2, like distract yourself from the thought that you're in to give yourself a different thing to think about. Because the thing of it is I really believe that when we're in an anxious state, it's not the time to solve things. Being in an anxious state is not that point to say, what do I got to do about not having this anymore? That's not the time. For me, when I look at an anxious moment, for me in that moment, it's how can I get my mind off the thought I'm in, because it's making me physiologically off track.
Agreed. And I think sometimes starting with the physiology is important too. Like if you have the mental and emotional anxiety, that then creates the physiological response.
Right.
Changing either one will affect the other.
Right.
And sometimes it's easier. In fact, for me, at least, was much easier period to start with the physiological components, like you said, standing up, going for a walk, doing something physical with your body that will change your state, and then it'll bleed into the other side of things.
Agreed. And I want to make a note so we can come back to it when you can't. Okay, so aside from in those moments when we forget, right? Those moments that we're so far in that anxious state or that anxiety or that panic attack that we forget. Any other tips on that spectrum before we go to the next of, okay, you do remember, and here's some tips of when you have this plan, what that plan is. But before we go to that, any final thoughts on the forgetting aspect?
Yeah, I'm trying to get clarity on how I want to say this. To me, it's still the awareness piece of it first.
Bring me context.
So in order for us to even remember to do something, we have to be aware of ourselves strongly enough to know what we're slipping into and where our brain and where our body's going.
Well, I think that that's the dance of what comes first, the physiology or the action. And I think it's both, personally.
Mm-hmm. Right. But I can tell you there are some times that I don't realize I'm anxious until it's a while into the situation.
Yeah.
So I would almost want to find ways that this could be literally a completely different conversation of like other tips to help increase your body's awareness of what's happening earlier on in the process.
Yeah. Well, I think that you have a great point, Christy, because that's how to essentially what I'm hearing is how to recognize you're having an anxiety attack, how to recognize if you're getting into a panicked state.
Before it gets so far into it that it's much harder to remember what to do, to breathe, to take a walk, and all those things come up.
Yeah. And I think that my initial quick thought on that is it comes down to the conversation of getting to know yourself and getting to know what your balanced state is and getting to know, here's what I am. And it's interesting to me how many people that I work with who, when I'm doing, especially on the energy side of things, when they'll get to a calm state or a good state, that they've never felt that before. Mm-hmm. And once you feel that calm and once you feel that being able to fully breathe without reservation, I think then you actually know better, to your point, of what that anxiety really is. Because if we think about it, well over 60% of America struggle with all the time stress.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really strongly agree with that. And if someone lives with anxiety for such a strong, large part of their life, getting to that place of feeling a total peace and calm can feel weird.
Yeah, and I think yes. And for me, I look at me like I'm a kind of a high-strung person. I'm kind of a nervy person. And it comes down to that, who are you? Like, I know that about me. I know that I'm a little bit of an edgy person, and not making yourself wrong for that. But I know, like, okay, here's me just being my normal, I don't like labels, but just being a little bit of a heightened awareness person anyway, a bit of an edgy person. And I love that about me because it brings me so many amazing attributes. And I know, okay, when I get to hear this is anxiety, Jen, whereas this is just normal, balanced, calm Jen is what I call it.
Yeah, I like that distinction.
Yeah.
You're getting to know yourself first.
Right. What feels right to you? It may not be complete, relaxed, peace, calm. It may be like, because to be honest, sometimes when I'm really calm, it's like, oh, I don't like this.
I can relate.
No, Jen's an action person. Let's just keep me moving and we're good. Okay, so back to the topic at hand. And a great topic that I think we need to bring back is, and we've talked about it before, is that conversation of, aside from anxiety, just how to get to know yourself, how to get to know who you are, what you love, what feels right for you, what is that right for you, and distinguishing, here's part of who I am, and I don't make that wrong or bad. It just is. It is probably the most gifted things about you. So back to topic at hand. Okay, so we know, we see it, we understand, I'm in an anxious state, I'm in a panic state. Top tips in the moment to walk through what to do in the moment of an anxious state. The number one thing that I think of and comes to mind is, of course, breathing. Hands down. 10 deep cleansing breaths can recenter your nervous system. And while I do that, I'm more of the practice. I love box breathing, which is simple: 4 breaths in, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. And doing that as many times as you need to, again, until you start feeling as if your cellular function is coming back to balance. Christy, thoughts on that?
Breathing was number 1 on my list.
Yeah. What's your next one? What's your next tip for our listeners?
My next tip would be, there were 2 okay, 3. Is doing something else with your body. Just getting up and moving, taking a walk, getting out, and doing combining as many of these things as possible. So for me, it would be literally leaving my house, getting out in nature, getting the fresh air at the same time, and then moving. So it can be threefold of just changing the environment, changing your body positioning and moving it, and then also changing the state with other stimulus like fresh air and sunshine at the same time.
Yeah, I love the idea of movement and getting our bodies moving to change our state. Love it. Another that I love this philosophy. I've used it infrequently. I more so talk about it a lot because I know how much it helps, especially from what I've heard from that person having a more panicked, anxious thought, is connecting all 5 senses, is going through, okay, I'm sitting here seeing 5 things, hearing 5 things, touching 5 things, tasting 5 things if you can, and integrating all of your senses and 5 or 10 of each one to, again, stimulate your brain to do something else other than that panicked, anxious state that you're in. Again,
sorry. I was going to say, which I think is about focusing on something else that's independent about whatever's going on.
I think it's that. I also think it's using all your senses and changing all your senses just as you would. Like, for example, when I think about it, getting up, moving, walking, that changes one, maybe two of your senses. Whereas this actually integrates all of your senses and every part of your body so that it better allows potentially to be able to make that shift. Again, I've used it a handful of times when I've needed to. And it's been effective. More so, I've heard it to be very effective with some of my clients when I've suggested it and they've tried it.
Great.
Again, when they can come back to that remembering aspect of, okay, here's what I got to do in this moment. And maybe to start, it's just that one thing. Maybe you just start with, okay, I'm going to hear 10 things around me and just engage that one and then go to the next.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wanted to come back to, well, I'll hold off on it. Chrissy, what's your next tip?
I wanted to hear what you were starting on.
Yeah, it comes back to the last conversation. So as opposed to going on a tangent, I want to stay in these tips.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next thing on mine was some form of meditation.
Yeah.
So, and for me, that can be as simple as starting with the breathing, focusing on a sound, focusing on just your breath and something simple like that. And to me, I know we've had this conversation in the past. To me, there's no quote unquote wrong way to get into a meditative state, but to just do something that's going to completely ground and relax yourself. So for myself, I tend to like to listen to something. It definitely doesn't have to have words or anything, but to focus on some kind of sound so that I can, and that's why I made the comment of with engaging all the five senses. To me, it's about focusing on something else. And it's about engaging, like you said, all the different senses and allowing different stimulus to come into your body so that you can, in essence, distract yourself from whatever's causing the anxiety in the first place.
Yeah, definitely agree. Meditation for if that helps someone in the moment of an anxiety attack. I would not be able to go into meditation during an anxious state.
Agreed.
It would not work for me. And for some people it does. For me, if I'm in the midst of an anxiety attack, it could actually, for me, make it worse because I could be sitting there ruminating with all those negative thoughts, and I don't want to build those into my brain.
Right.
And I know hundreds of people who it's very beneficial for. So one of those spectrums.
Agreed. I've found it actually very helpful for me if I can not do what you just said, which is a really critical point, which is why for me, at least if and when I've tried it and it's been successful, I just start with the breathing. And then if I can calm through part of the breathing, then leading into a better meditative state can help pull me out of it the rest of the way.
Yeah.
But once again, knowing yourself to see how it works for you.
Yeah, it totally comes down to the knowing yourself. Agreed. Okay, so we have meditation, we have connection with getting up and active, we have connection with seeing, hearing, thinking, engaging all of our senses. Another thing that comes to me in mind, and this is one of the many that I keep in my back pocket when I'm having an anxious state, is writing or art therapy. For me, it's writing therapy. I write forward. I actually write forward of how I got out of this moment. And here's the moment that I had a year ago, and here's how I got out of it, and making it futuristic to say, because really what that does is it engages our brain and it tells our brain to think, how did you get out of this anxious state? And your brain says, how did you get out of this anxious state? And your brain is forced to comply with whatever you give it. And if you give your brain the thought of, here's what I'm going to write about and think about, for me, that is so healing and so healthy. The other part of writing for me that's really helpful in an anxious moment is making it in story form and taking myself out of it, almost disassociating from the feeling. I can tell you for years before I really started navigating the anxiousness I was having, I would try writing it through of what I was feeling. And it was harmful for me. It didn't work well for me. It didn't work well for me to write through, here's what I'm feeling and here's how this. And it didn't land well for me. There were times that I would tell you it actually brought me a little bit down further. And that's how I learned how to write in a way that honored who I am. And that worked for me.
I love that you brought all that up because in my experience, when I've written out certain things, I agree 100% that there's been some times where writing, I jump into a rabbit hole loop and it makes it all worse.
Yeah.
At the same time, and this is the points that you've made in the past, similar to what you just said in this moment, is in the questions that we're asking. And so instead of asking the why questions of why do I feel this way and jumping into that point and writing all that down, asking the questions of how can I move past this and how did I move past this in that futuristic sense.
Yeah.
Just asking yourself better questions, you'll yield better answers.
Yeah, the thing that for me, the important part that you mentioned was the futuristic part. Because even with the right questions, for me, as I try to write in the moment, it doesn't help me.
Mm.
And I think, again, that's where it comes down to honoring who you are and doing it in a way that works for you. I'm not as familiar with art therapy, but I'm starting to gain familiarity with it and understanding how that can really benefit. I like drawing. I'm a doodler. And actually, as I say that out loud, when I've had anxious states, just the simple art of taking a pen and paper and doodling can sometimes help re-stimulate different parts of the brain to get the moment out of anxiousness. That's really interesting. I never realized that's what I was doing.
Cool.
That's pretty cool. Okay, aha moment. Okay, moving along from that. Any other tips on that before I keep moving, Christy?
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, other things that I think about in the moment. I love oils. I love having oils. In fact, I tried actually opening it before. We had a little bit of a moment in the house and had someone who needed just a moment from mom. And I wanted a sense of calm from just bringing myself back before. And lavender is a big one. And just that consistent lavender smell can be very healing and helpful for us. I have a lot of oils just all around me so that I know at any given point what smell might stimulate different things. And certainly for anxiety, I know lavender is a good one. I'm not the oil expert, but that'll be a show for the future that we can bring more ideas for you.
Agreed 100%. What I'm actually thinking is rather humorous right now, just as a total side note, is the fact that we didn't correlate our lists of what we wrote down ahead of time, and you're running down everything that I've written down.
That's funny.
Aromatherapy oils was next on my list as well.
That's funny. The other thing that comes to mind, and I know that it's fairly common. I'm not familiar with Rescue Remedy. But I know that I've heard a lot about it. Christy, I'm sure that you can talk about this.
Yeah.
And Christy actually turned me on to the ER 911, which has been impactful for me. The other thing that I find really helpful is, ironically, and I don't know why it works, is actually ginger. And actually crystallized ginger will actually balance me somehow emotionally, which I think it's cool that it works that way.
That's really awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So to your question and point of Rescue Remedy is a flower essence, Bach flower essence, and I found it to be really amazing to help shift the physiology when we're in an anxious place. And the ER 911 that you mentioned, that's a homeopathic concoction of different remedies, different homeopathic remedies that do the same thing as Rescue Remedy, but they're totally different. You can use them together, separately. They don't interact with each other. I don't think ER 911 is something that people can usually get commercially, like on Amazon or something. I'm pretty sure that's just through the organization that I've accessed, and other offices will probably have that as well. But the remedies that are in there, I believe one of them, I would literally need to look at the bottle to read all the different remedies, but one of them I believe is aconite, which is a homeopathic remedy that it takes that shock and that fear and that anxiousness out of a moment. Gelsemium might be another one. Arnica might be in there. There's a couple other things that just kind of take the that jarred oversensitivity and stress out of your nervous system in that physical way. And it doesn't change necessarily what's going on around you. So that's part of what you're talking about in the writing piece of, talk about this futuristically. How did I get out of this? And it brings some repatterning to that. But from the standpoint of, in this moment, just kind of hitting the reset button on your physiology can help kickstart everything else.
Yeah. The other thing, yes. And in addition to all of that, I think, and I'm not the expert of it, but I'm starting to explore more about it, is herbs and different herbs that can help calm. I'm a huge fan of chamomile tea. In fact, I have a very large glass of it right next to me right now. But even other teas, and again, more to come perhaps on that for the future, guys, to learn more about how herbs can actually, and the thing of it is, for me at least, is the best way for me that I've found to prevent anxiety and prevent anxious moments is what you do when you're not in that anxious state. It's all those foundational pieces that you're doing to take care of yourself, to keep your cortisol low, to keep your stress level manageable, to keep yourself unbalanced with your food, because food is such a big contributor to people with anxiety, guys. I can tell you from directly to just how you're moving your body and how your body's feeling.
Yes. Yes to all of that.
Yes. Okay. Anything else, Christy, on the tips for in the moment, what you recommend for people?
Those were definitely the big ones that I had written down that were in the moment stuff.
Okay. The other thing that I made a note of and then I want to talk through is, especially if we look at today's day and age, and let's just face it, we don't often have an anxious moment that we can just step away or go write something. Maybe it's in the middle of work. Maybe you have an anxious moment in the middle of a business meeting. Maybe you have an anxious moment. I can tell you that for me, prior to leaving the company I had worked for, I was in a director role and I was on the executive leadership board. And I can tell you, in conference rooms, there were times in the middle of an executive board meeting, I would actually be sitting there and having an anxious moment. And having things in that moment is really important. And the number one thing that I had done in those moments is that's when I would go on my notepad and I would start writing through different affirmations. Just, you can do breathing exercises fairly easily. If you're sitting in a room of people that they won't necessarily be the otherwise. I would assert that there would be certain rescue remedies that you could sneakily probably get in your mouth to calm you, at least in that moment. Of course, if you can in that kind of situation, getting up and walking around would be helpful, but oftentimes we just can't.
Mm-hmm. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I know that there is a rescue remedy gum.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know if there's like a mint form, not mint exactly, but if there's just like a sucking candy kind of form of it or something along those lines. But I'm pretty sure that there is a gum. There's drops, something like that. So as far as like if you were in a board meeting with other individuals, what would be more discreet of just something to pop in your mouth like that?
Right.
I agree with the breathing point. And then to your point earlier, I think you may not be able to taste something as far as engaging the five senses, but that's something you could easily do in a room of other people if you're having an anxious moment.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, agreed. Good. So, intent for the day: key actions in the moment, anxiety, tips, strategies to carry through. Any other final thoughts, Christy, for our audience, tips, suggestions, or otherwise on this point?
We've said it a dozen times and you mentioned it again. The foundational pieces are really, really, really key to me, is what we're doing, not just in the moment to get you through. And of course, when you have that moment, that's all that matters. You're not going to be worrying about everything else and how to prevent it and from happening ever again in that state. But in the prevention side of things, keeping track of how well you're eating, how much water you're drinking, exercise, sleep, all those key factors will help prevent them from happening as frequently as intensely in the first place.
Yep. Agreed on all of that. And the one I'll leave you with this, I'll leave everybody with this, is you've heard me say it before, I'm going to keep saying it, is keeping the labels off, keeping the judgment of it off, keeping the quote unquote wrongness of it off. The more that we can disconnect from this is something that's happening, and disconnecting from owning it as my anxiety, or it allows us to then disassociate it from it better and actually help move past it quicker if we can follow some of those principles. And guys, as always, if you're struggling, you don't have to struggle alone. Connect with any of us here. There's so many supportive people in the world today from a social media perspective, whether it be on LinkedIn or YouTube or Facebook or Instagram. And look for those that resonate with you. Look for those voices that you think, this is someone who gets me and understands me. And follow their content, follow their tips, and see how they work for you. And as always, if you're in that tough space from a mental or emotional wellness perspective, and you find yourself ready to do something, call the hotline, call the awareness hotline. There's always someone that can help walk through, and there's always a better side on the other side. It's just sometimes it's not as easy to see the light. So, any additional thoughts on that, Christy?
Nope, beautifully said.
Good. All right, guys, we have not determined our topic for next week. However, we will be having a special guest. So stay tuned for more to come over the next couple days about our next topic and who's joining us. And we will see you right back here next week, Friday, 10 o'clock. Thanks, guys.
Have a great day.